I've got all my stuff.
Yep.
Somebody always has to call people together. That's my job. Welcome, everyone. It is Wednesday. It must be a council meeting. This is the Council Committee of the Whole meeting, March 1st. Welcome, and I really appreciate our extensive agenda. Before I call the meeting to order, though, I just want to say just a couple of quick things. This is a period of transition. We'll spend a little more time on this maybe later in the meeting, but I really appreciate the fact that many people's terms, all of our terms are coming to an end, and there's a new term starting as soon as next week, so this is real time. And I'm really pleased the folks who could come here today. I know there's a number who can't, but I really want to introduce a new person. So this is a transition. We have a new chief of police who's actually officially not a chief until the state of Minnesota says he is. But I just want to give a chance for us to say hello to Director Morales, Ernest Morales, and Ernie, stand up a little bit and maybe just say hello to our.
Thank you. Ernest Morales III. I'm really happy to be part of the family here in Twin Cities, and I appreciate the opportunity and the confidence for the Metropolitan Council to bring me along. I know that we're experiencing many challenges within the system, and you've hired me to take us in a new direction and a vision that will get us to a good place. I do ask you of patience, and as I deal with each and every member's issues, just to say, lack of better terms, I'm looking to give each and every one of you what you need. But I ask that you have patience because I want to collaborate and I want to come up with a solid plan that'll take us not only to solve the problem today, but will solve the problem moving forward. We have to come with a long-term strategy that'll correct the system. But more importantly, I think one of our biggest problems, as you know, in law enforcement is retention and recruitment. So I want to build a solid plan where we can effectively recruit officers, but more importantly, retain them. Because treating professional police officer with respect is very important, especially in the last couple of years with what's taking place in the law enforcement community. I'm well aware of 32 years in policing that the pendulum swings left to right, and this constantly happens. I know we go up and down, and we're currently coming up. Our challenge is that we have to communicate that to our young officers. And we have to let them know that me, as the leader of the agency, the police force, I have their back and I will support them, provided that they do everything that my training team teaches them to do. As long as they do it correctly and they do it right and they do it legally and professionally, I have their back 100%. So moving forward, I just want to let you know that I look forward to meeting with each and every one of you and fulfilling your vision as we move forward as one team, one fight. Thank you.
Thank you, and you're so welcome here, and we know your background. We've been hearing about you coming, so it's just a great day that you're here. And I would just say a little bit of the obvious. This has not been a quiet week in the nice little sleepy Midwestern metropolitan area, and we have our challenges. But you know what? We've had challenges before, and this council is committed to supporting you, supporting the whole team. And together, we're going to really make a difference. So I really appreciate everybody here who's been involved in this process. And knowing that we have to take all these events, and you never know every day what's going to happen. So we face it as it comes. The agenda is pretty packed, in part because you probably remember we didn't have a council meeting last week, and that was the right call. Thank you, Administrator Pokey, who said we are not going to make people trudge through a blizzard again, although we've done that enough. But it does mean we have a lot of work here at the Committee of the Whole, which we can do on an emergency basis, do actual business items, and we have a lot of business items. So with that, there was the meeting of the Committee of the Whole on February 15th, and the minutes were sent out. So is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved, Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're on to the consent agenda. My lovely assistant here knows that if we actually have no, for the record, have no feedback that the agenda is wrong, it's assumed to be approved. So we actually don't vote on it. But you're right. I just want everybody to know somebody's looking after me here. We're on to the consent agenda, and is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda is approved. So we're on to the non-consent business reports of the standing committee, and first, the community development. Councilmember Lindgren.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Council members, Community Development brings one item for consideration forward this evening. It's item 2023-48. It's to approve the 2023 Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan. So as you know, the Livable Communities Act requires that we, the council, prepare an annual plan for distribution of the Livable Communities funds that includes funding availability, program guidelines, and scoring criteria. The 2023 fund distribution plan proposes a total of $27.5 million in grant funds to be made available from the 2023 authorized budget and the Livable Communities Act reserve accounts. The sources are $5.5 million for the uses for $5.5 million for the tax-based revitalization account, including contamination cleanup, site investigation, and seeding equitable economic development grants, and $16.6 million for the Livable Communities demonstration account, which includes pre-development, policy development, LCDA development, and transit-oriented development grants, and $5.4 million for the local housing incentives account for affordable multifamily and home ownership grants. At the February 6th Community Development Committee meeting, committee members voted to approve the plan and passed an amendment with the approval of the motion to include a commitment to meeting in a public session format not less than 2 times in the next 6 months to discuss geographic distribution issues and program goals for the Livable Communities demonstration account and transit-oriented development grant programs. So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve the 2023 Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan as shown in Attachment 1 in the business item, and to direct the Community Development Committee to meet the public work session not less than 2 times by August 2023 to discuss geographic distribution issues and related questions for the LCDA and TOD development grant programs.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, comments? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really glad to see the second part of this action that we're going to have conversations with some of the communities. We had so many communities last year in the last cycle choose not to participate anymore, and I know a lot of them in my district did, and it's unfortunate, I think, and I think it's also important to start looking at, you know, the developments that are happening in some of the cities on the outer edge, because there are good developments happening, and they're often not as scored as highly or paid attention to. So I think it's really important to have this discussion, and I'm glad we're going to do it publicly.
Great, good point. And it's really one of the most important things this council does is provide these livability grants. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was the one no vote, and while I very much appreciate my colleagues agreeing that we need to take a transparent public look at this to make sure that it's fair, I'm concerned about the $27.5 million going out before we do that. So that's why I'm voting no.
I got you. Thank you for the clarification. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just echo that I had some concerns as well. I did vote however to move it forward, but in that motion, we also said that we'd be bringing the item back to continue to discuss it throughout the year, I think at 2 more times. So that was part of an amendment that I made. So just to make sure that we continue to talk about the geographic disbursement, that was part of it as well.
Right, great, thank you. General Counsel.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the second part of the proposed action, I think, was read differently than it is in the committee report. So I just want to make sure that everyone is clear what they're voting on. Councilmember Lilligren, was the action what you read? Or is that what you intended? I think we just need to be clear for the minutes.
So let me correct my motion. It is as printed in the business item that was published. So I have different language for some reason on my script. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. She only gets to use this excuse for, she's new. So I will restate my motion, please.
Thank
So,
you.
first, to approve the 2023 Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan as shown in attachment 1 of the business item, and part 2, direct staff to organize public committee work sessions to discuss geographic distribution of funding in the Livable Community Demonstration account and transit-oriented development programs. Thank you.
It's important that we get the language right. So thank you, both of you, all three of you. Any other comments, questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
And one nay. That motion carried. And there is no report from the Environment Committee. There are several reports from the Management Committee. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to just read some information so that we kind of are level set on where this item is at, because some changes have been made.
Okay.
I might restate some of that when I get into the motion as I make it. Business item 2023-40 was approved by the Management Committee on February 8th and is being brought to the Committee of the Whole today for council approval. The item asks for council approval on resolution 2023-1 authorizing our next Public Facilities Authority loan. There are 2 clerical changes made to the resolution since it was approved by the Management Committee, hence the change between each body that you'll be seeing here today. The resolution contains language around the council meeting, which the council meeting it was approved, and the name of the recording secretary at that meeting. So because we've had to shift some of our meetings, this was supposed to go to a regular meeting and now it's today. So we have to be very specific in our resolutions as to who's monitoring all of this, and recording secretary is one of them. So you'll see that it was changed from Bridget Toski to Jenna Ernst. There are 2 clerical type of modifications, and no other modifications were made. The changes have been reviewed by legal, and the changes should be communicated today in all of our comments for all of us to see those changes, and we have been provided that documentation. I know it's out front for people who are here today to keep an eye on this. I think it was published online, and there's even a marked up version that I looked at to make sure that everything was in line as well. So with that, Mr. Chair, again, this is Minnesota Public Facilities Authority PFA loan agreement and general obligation wastewater revenue note, and it is business item 2023-40. So for the record, again, I'd like to inform the council that minor clerical modifications were made to the resolution documents considered by the Management Committee. The modification to the documents reflect that the resolution was considered on March 1st, making sure that that is what I have. Yes, okay. Just making sure my documents are all tracking. At today's meeting rather than the council's regular meeting, and that the name of the recording secretary was changed. For many years, Environmental Services has participated in the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority Clean Water Revolving Fund loan program to fund a portion of its capital expenditures. The current 2022 PFA loan will be fully depleted in March. Environmental Services has applied for a new 2023 loan in the amount of $40 million, which fund expenditures on specific capital projects for approximately the next 12 months. One reason the council uses this loan program is because it has a subsidized interest rate, making it less expensive financing and a great mechanism rather than issuing council bonds. The proposed 2023 loan is expected to have an interest rate of 1.568%, which is approximately a whole percent less than council bonding issuance. It will save us an estimated $4 to $6 million in the future interest costs over a 20-year term of the loan, which is fantastic. Proposed Resolution 2023-1 authorizes the regional administrator to execute a new 2023 loan agreement, allows for the issuance and sale of the required general obligation wastewater revenue note securing the loan, and sets parameters for the terms of the new loan. The parameters state that the loan must close within 90 days of council approval, cannot exceed $40 million, and its interest rate cannot exceed 2.875%. PFA loans are paid back from wastewater systems revenues, and the council has not levied for debt service on these loans. These loans demonstrate stewardship, as the PFA loan program provides a low-cost financing tool that saves substantial interest costs compared to the council issuing its own bonds. Therefore, Mr. Chair, the proposed action is that, and I would move that the Metropolitan Council approve the attached parameters resolution 2023-1, the 2 clerical changes, which authorizes the regional administrator to execute a project loan agreement with the Minnesota Public Facilities Authority in substantially the form as attached, as the attached draft agreement, and authorizes the issuance and sale of supporting general obligation wastewater revenue notes securing the loan in substantially the form as the draft note referenced in this resolution.
Well stated.
That was a lot.
It was a lot.
Thanks for following along.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, questions? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure we've got a presentation for item 2023-44, and when that's done, I'll be prepared to make a motion for action on that as well.
All right, welcome Jim Alexander and Dan Abelson. We're going to hear about what we're going to vote on.
All right, Mr. Chair, I think I'll kick it off, Dan. So we have a couple of slides to talk about the technical, and then Dan will get into the legal part of the piece. And so I'm Jim Alexander, Project Director for the Green Line Extension. You have our slide up. Next slide, please. I guess I'll. Thanks, Dan. All right, well, so we're going to give a little overview of systems because a lot of people don't really know what that is. So I'll talk about that. And Dan will talk about the agreement framework and the schedule, because this is really all about shifting the schedule for the systems contractor. This is a follow-up from our civil settlement agreement that the council considered and approved last year. And so this is to get to our ultimate end goal to identify that revenue service. And I would just say that a couple of things. We're still looking to hold 2027 for a revenue service date as we currently see, but Dan will talk about some of the delays that we've had with the CCANT work and the Kenilworth corridor. We're still trying to formulate that in terms of how that's going to affect the schedule, but for what we know today, we think that 2027 is still a valid date. And also I just want to mention, just get this question a lot about where we are in the project. Overall, we're a little over 70% complete. If you haven't been out in the western suburbs, you'll see a lot of structure and track and OCS poles starting to go up. So it's come along pretty well. Civil construction is a little over 75%, and the systems work out in the field is probably less than 10%, but due to a change order that we did for the storage, we're nearly 50% of the overall payment to the contractor, because they've been continuing to procure equipment and store that locally so we can have that ready to go when we're ready to install. So next slide there. Okay, so just a little bit about this contract. This was Aldridge Parsons. We awarded this contract back in 2019 for the total amount just under $200 million. This is in the budget there, so that's all accounted for. And change orders to date, a little over $14 million. And as I mentioned, the storage, the big component of that, just under $9 million. And I could say that I think that's really saved us a lot. Hearing supply and demand issues all over the states right now, and I think we're able to kind of skim through that issue here. So far so good. But Aldridge Parsons leading this effort, and kind of getting nitty gritty here. 20 traction power substations. That's upper photo on the right there. This is essentially brings the power from Excel and transfers it into our system so we can run the trains. And ordinary system, the OCS, those are the poles. There's wires associated with that. So like I say, out in Eden Prairie in particular, you'll see a lot of OCS poles up already. Contractors working diligently on that. Tunnel facilities, we have tunnel houses to support the fans and all the good stuff in the Kenilworth Tunnel. And then communications, we need to link this whole system up with our system network, and it goes to the Rail Control Center in Franklin that we have established. And then there's also a signaling system, and most importantly, testing and integration. We'll talk about this as we move forward. It seems like everything's done, but there's a lot of testing that goes on for this type of project. We need to make sure that everything is in sync with each other, including the existing system. So we've shown these bubbles before. As I talked, the one on the left is completed. The civil construction schedule is essentially done, with that caveat that we will still have to do some modifications for the delay that we had experienced last year, and we're still looking at some things early this year with the secant issues we've had. So we're in the second bubble right now where we're in the process. And this, what we're talking about today, really sets the stage to get a change order into the contract so we can get a new schedule established, but also establishes a process so we can get to a cost on that. So we're not coming together today for costs on that. That'll be coming at some point in the future here. But I will say that we have estimated a number, and we've talked about the overall $2.7 billion of an estimate for this project. We see that is tucked in that number, so we think we have that accounted for. But I'll just advise that we are just embarking on that process to identify what that actual number is going to be. So that's going to be a little bit of a process to get done. We're hoping that by second quarter we'll have a better handle on what that's going to be, but we'll keep you informed as we proceed along. And then these other two bubbles, we still have other contracts to update. Our designer, AECOM, needs to be updated as well to take us through into revenue service, and we have a plethora of other contracts that need to be accounted for. But the bulk of it are these two on the right, these two bubbles on the right. So I'll hand it over to Dan.
Mr. Chair, council members, I'm Dan Abelson. I'm an Associate General Counsel in the Office of General Counsel. I'm going to talk today about the agreement framework. So first, this agreement will be integrated into the contract via change order. One key point is that the council is not being asked to authorize any payments today. So today is about integrating, one, the new alternative dispute resolution process into the contract, and then two, setting the new schedule. So on the alternative dispute resolution process, I'm going to go through some pieces of it. There are more details on that process in the business item as well, if you want to look at that. The key points is that it's a more robust process than the existing process in the contract. The process is relatively similar to the process that we're undertaking now with the London Crossing joint venture on the civil contract. It'll help ensure that disputes are resolved quickly. It will ensure that the costs are vetted and documented by nationally recognized experts that'll help verify these costs and assist in settlement negotiation. Will help constrain costs and schedule. We'll be using an evaluative mediation process with a mediator who's an expert in construction dispute resolution, and that will aid in our dispute resolution. And this process will also help avoid potential litigation. If we're unable to reach resolution in mediation, then we'll go to binding arbitration for matters that are not resolved in arbitration. Our existing contract process, if we can't reach a resolution with the contractor, we end up in litigation. So this helps avoid that. And what this process is going to be looking at essentially are the costs that the contractors incurred resulting from the additional time from the schedule extension. And then also, if the parties agree for any future issues that arise out of the contract, the parties can choose to use this process if we think that'll work better for that type of dispute. The settlement payments will be made by change order, and any change order for those payments will come before the Executive Change Control Board and the council, just like other larger change orders. So that's when the council would be approving cost changes to this contract. The second key piece is that this will establish the new schedule for the systems contract. So it's going to add about 28 months to the systems construction schedule. And this deals with the impacts to the schedule up to January 1, 2022. As Jim mentioned, some of the newer secant delays Those will be dealt with separately, but what this does now is it gives us a baseline to work from. So, you know, we're ready when it's time to look at the impact of those other delays. It establishes a completion date for systems construction. And two other key pieces is that it realigns the sequence for which the construction segments are accepted from the civil contractor and turned over to the systems contractor. And then it also realigns the sequence from which the construction segments are accepted from the systems contractor and turned over to the council to prepare for revenue operations. This is important because it avoids delay by accepting the project segments from the civil contractors that are completed, and it will allow much of the systems work and testing on other segments of the project to be completed while the Kenilworth LRT tunnel work is ongoing. The business item on the council's being asked to approve is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a change order to contract number 17P000 with Aldridge Parsons, a joint venture, to add the 00810 supplemental conditions for rebaseline system schedule cost claims resolution. We're available to answer any questions.
Any questions? Sternick, Councilmember Sternick.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondering, like, specifically, who's going to do the negotiation on our side, on Metropolitan Council? Do we?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I could take that, Chair, Councilmember. It'll be led by Venable, our legal advisor. They have an entity called Whitley, who's a construction cost accountant. We also have a consultant called Troner that's involved in this process as well. So it's that team who will be looking at the bid documents, looking at documentation that the contractor's saying it's going to cost extra money for the additional time, and that'll be kind of run through the ringer to figure out what a recommended number would be. Then it'll come back to us. Then we eventually come to you to get approval for that.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I would add that's the same process we've been using on the civil construction contract as well. So it seems to be working pretty well in that case. Civil, much more complicated than this. This is really just more an extension of time where we had some other issues to resolve with civil, but we still need to plow some ground to get this thing done.
Okay.
Well, and I see this as being such a critical step that you've worked on for many months, but really aligns the schedule to what this project requires. And that is not an easy feat. So congratulations on getting it to this point where we can actually have confidence that we can hold these contractors accountable and finish the project in a prudent way. So appreciate this work. Any other thoughts, questions? I'm going to go back to Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move staff's recommendation, which would authorize the council again to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the change order to the systems contract 17P000 with Aldridge Parsons, a joint venture, and to add the 00810 supplemental conditions for the rebaseline system schedule cost claims resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion, questions? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carried. Thank you, Jim, Dan, and Judy.
Thank
I think we're on to a transportation. I want to make sure we didn't have another management. No, we don't. On to transportation. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-33 is to authorize the chair and regional administrator to execute the full funding grant agreement for the Gold Line BRT project. The Gold Line BRT project is an important connection in the metro system, connecting to LRT, ABRT, and to the local bus system. All local funding has been committed for the project, including $240 million from Ramsey and Washington counties. In July, the council awarded a contract to Ames Construction for civil construction for the Gold Line BRT project under a letter of no prejudice, LOMP, which allows the project to use local funds for construction in advance of federal funds being available for reimbursement. The Ames contract has a DBE goal of 17%. The FFGA can be executed following notification from the FTA that the grant is ready to execute. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the chair and the regional administrator to execute the full funding grant agreement for the Metro Gold Line Bus Rapid Transit project with the Federal Transit Administration in an amount of $239,345,549 if awarded by the FTA.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? All righty. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion is carried. So we're on to other business, and this is for appointments to the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. And I especially want to thank Councilmember Vento and Lee, who along with Tony Yaruso served as a nominating committee to fill a number of positions. The council knows that there are this impasse was created by the legislature to advise the council on matters relating to recreation, all the work we're doing with open spaces, and we have 9 members that are appointed by the council, but they're rotating members, and because of that, the staggered 4-year terms, there are a number that are open, but not all. There are, due to the term expirations on districts E through H, and there's 1 term resignation in the impasse district D. So we've gone through all the appropriate notifications and designations and publications at the Secretary of State's office, and we're ready for approval with my with those recommendations and my consideration. I am putting forward for District F, Cecily Harris, and District G, Anthony Taylor. Those terms will expire on January 1st, 2027. And then also a 2-year appointment to fill out a term in District D, and that term would expire on January 1st, 2025. And District D would be Tess Bushka. So with those nominations, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve those appointments.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento. Thank you so much. Any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, there was a question, a comment, perhaps.
I just want to make a note of the great work that this commission does. They are tireless, very thorough. I'm really impressed with how well they prepare for the meetings and how much they know about our regional parks and trails. Very engaged. And I also want to commend the staff who do a great job of providing really thorough presentations for them and keeping them abreast of the needs that our parks and trails systems have. And I want to make note of the fact that they make an effort at every meeting to have what is called an equity nudge. Our former council colleague, Atlas Ingebrigtsen, really made a point of making sure that they do that, and they do, and it's just been really motivating. So I just want to do kudos to MPOS.
Thank you for mentioning that, and thank you for your service to that group. Any other thoughts? We almost voted. I think we have voted. All those, let's vote again. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carried. On to our information item. Terry, and I know you're going to introduce Beverly Rodriguez, Margaret Perez, and Ryan Leafheit, but thank you so much for your patience. We've had you ready to make this presentation at least several times over the past few months, it seems. So we're really looking forward to it. Incredibly important, especially I think some of the things we've been hearing this week. So take it away.
I wasn't planning to introduce Mr. Chair. We got this.
All right, well, you can introduce. Hi, Margaret. You introduce yourselves again. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Zelli, council members. My name is Margaret Perez. I am the Manager of Outreach and Special Initiatives within the Metro HRA. And I am here this evening with Senior Outreach Coordinator Ryan Ottenheim-Leifheit and Sergeant Beverly Rodriguez, newly appointed to the HAT team. And we are here to actually, this presentation was kind of spurred even by a question that Councilmember Vento made when I was presenting to you about a very different initiative called the Mobility or the Community Choice Demonstration Initiative, asking about what are we doing with the winter approaching, with the very visible challenge of homelessness in our community. And we are doing a lot to address this within the council, and there's a lot else happening in our region as well. So we're going to try to just give you a snapshot of what we're up to, what our approach is, and you know what are some gaps and things on the horizon as well. So with that, I am the newest member of the council up here, and I actually was not around at the inception of this program, but I have been nominated to talk about our background, funny enough. So I'm going to attempt to just explain the genesis of this partnership, and then I will be passing the mic to my colleagues to really talk about the work itself, as I'm not on the front line. So this partnership started in the summer of 2018 when Metro Transit PD and Metro HRA initiated a partnership aimed at addressing the issue of homelessness, specifically looking at people using transit for shelter. By September 2018, Metro Transit Police Department had established a team of officers, and they were certified as street outreach workers. If I'm correct, I believe you were one of those original officers that was actually out on the streets. And they were dedicated to working overnights between shelter closing and transit morning rush hours. They were initially working kind of in the St. Paul area only, so working at Central Station and the end of the line in St. Paul, and kind of trying to funnel people into winter safe space buildings that were set up at the time. In November of 2018, we were lucky enough at Metro HRA to be awarded 89 mainstream vouchers. And Ryan will be describing a little bit more about the purpose of those vouchers, but those were specifically for people experiencing homelessness. And our application specifically looked at this connection between the HAT team. So HAT became our primary referral partner for those mainstream vouchers. And so this HAT partnership was formed, and HAT stands for, of course, Homelessness Action Team. From there, we were awarded an additional 67 mainstream vouchers in 2019. And we, early in 2019, also initiated a contract with Radius Health, a service provider who helps to provide street outreach and also kind of funnel people into case management, into longer-term case management, and assist with the housing search and lease-up process as well. As you might all recall, a little something called the pandemic hit in 2020 and sort of upended all of our work. And one of the major ways that our partnership was impacted during this time was that we suspended overnight transit service. And so a lot of our work starting in 2020 shifted, and again, I say our very generously, the work really of our street outreach team, our HAT officers and our partners in the field really shifted to encampments and trying to kind of monitor the places where people were going instead of shelter. And during that time, we were also awarded an additional 47 mainstream vouchers. And on the HRA side, we were working with CARES Act money that we were able to leverage, not just for our homelessness response, but also to prevent homelessness with our existing voucher holders. Into 2021, that is when we were awarded 218 emergency housing vouchers. Again, Ryan will be talking a little bit more about what those mean. One of our staff members, Tasha Belshan, is in the audience as well. She kind of oversees our emergency housing voucher program. Very similar in intent to the mainstream voucher program, but with some additional kind of freedoms and flexibilities, as well as federal funding attached to them for services. And we also had, rent help MN at play, the eviction moratorium, all of those things were impacting our work and keeping people housed. In 2022 is where we saw those really helpful things start to phase out. So the rent help MN and eviction moratorium ending, we did see, an increase in homelessness again. But we also were awarded an additional 50 mainstream vouchers, which just came into play at the end of this past year. In the future, by September of this year, our EHVs will be sunsetting because the way that those vouchers were designed was for them to be kind of a temporary response to homelessness caused by the pandemic. And so they were always expected to be phased out by September of 2023. But we're also seeing other funding coming online. There's a very generous housing budget at the federal level that is, hopefully going to trickle down to the local level. We're seeing $607 million in federal funding for mainstream vouchers, and we expect to see some of that at the local level. And our focus is really shifting, not shifting, but kind of expanding to also include not just getting people leased up, but also looking at long-term housing stability. So how do we keep people housed? And with that overview, I'm gonna just pass the mic. Do we need to speak into the mic? Is that for recording purposes, or do you mind if we just project? I'm not hearing my projection. I can be passing it between us, but.
Maybe you should pass it just in case there might be some streaming online.
I can forward the slides for you.
So, Mr. Chair, council members, my name is Bev Rodriguez. I'm the sergeant of the Homeless Action Team. I've had the pleasure of meeting a few of the council members when I was in K-9. So just a little background, I was part of the Homeless Action Team when it was initiated as an officer. I left, I got a dog, I became K-9, and then I came back as a sergeant. So I came back to run the unit again, and so I worked really closely with HRA beforehand, so they were happy to see me again. But during the process of considering anyone for a housing voucher, there's many factors that come into play. I do a lot of outreach with Hennepin County, and we're now finalizing, we actually just finalized our contract with Radius Health. So they're the Ramsey County side, and then we also have the Hennepin County side. So like for instance, right now I'm doing outreach at Mall of America Transit Center. And I do that every Monday from noon to 2, and then we try to get a second day like on Thursday or Friday. We also go out to current encampments on our Met Council property. But during the process, there are many factors we have to consider. For instance, is it just one individual? Is it a family? Do they have children? We've been running into a lot of them that have a service dog. And then not only that is the qualifying aspect of it. So we try to gather their story, criminal history. Right off the bat, they'll tell us that they have all these felonies, violent crimes. So that, that kind of determines which route we want to take as far as vouchers. But not only that, even if we can't get them into the voucher program, we can still get them into shelter. So we still try to find shelter for them every night while we're trying to figure out what we can do with their background. So, we'll look into, specific backgrounds, like for instance, any pending court dates that they have. They might have some chemical dependency issues, and they can bring that up at their court date and say, hey, I'm working with HAT. They're trying to get me into housing. There's one instance where we were able to house a lady, and she had chemical dependency issues. They were able to get her into a diversion program while she was able to work with us. So there's instances like that we can work with. The substance, the chemical abuse and the mental health kind of come hand in hand with homelessness. So we've been encountering a lot of that on the train and transit centers. A little of the barriers, I guess, would say is even with the substance abuse and mental health, we encounter that they're not responsible enough to meet, even just make an appointment with us. If we do set up an appointment, they miss it, or they don't have transportation, or they're not taking their medication sometimes, they're off their medication. So there's a lot of barriers that we have to face on top of what's already, taking place with them. Their criminal background, like I mentioned, and then availability of slots, the units, and I mean, sometimes with, like I mentioned, like they have a dog, so we can't get them into certain places with the dog, or sometimes the amount of people that we're gonna use for one voucher, we can't get them into certain units. There's only so many availability units for families. But some of the partnerships that we do rely on that we're currently working with, like I mentioned, is Radius Health, which is Ramsey County area, and then Hennepin County Outreach. They're able to get into like their benefits side of it, try to get them reconnected to benefits if that's one issue. We have a pastor that we work with on the Hennepin County side as well. We work with MPD Outreach. Minneapolis DID is they have like a storage area for homelessness because they don't have places to store their belongings. So Minneapolis DID will actually provide storage for them, like these big bins, and will store their items until they need it. So we have a lot of partnerships out there that can assist us with certain areas, but while we're trying to get them into housing, we're also trying to work on other areas, like trying to get them IDs, trying to get them their Social Security card, like I mentioned, trying to get them reconnected to the benefits. So like I mentioned, it's not like we just encounter someone and, okay, let's get you into a voucher, let's get you into housing. There's a lot of factors that come into play and a lot of barriers that come into play. And we encounter homelessness on a daily basis, but we can't, I mean, it's very minimal the amount of people that we can actually house with the requirements that, and we'll go deep into the requirements. I know that you'll talk about that. The pathway to voucher, I'll just go a little more into depth on like what from the initial point of contact to when we actually get them housed. So street outreach, like I mentioned, I go out to MOA, Transit Center, I encounter someone with Hennepin County Outreach. We make that initial contact. We determine what their needs are. Sometimes and we'll gather their story because we don't know what they qualify for as of yet. So we gather their story, we get information from them, like I mentioned, how many people, is it just them? We do that triage service, so we'll determine if we need to get them into like our higher ground in St. Paul or Minneapolis to go get their IDs, paperwork, or get them reconnected to services. And then it comes into the assessment side of it. We'll do a release of information so we can try to gather more information on the background, do a criminal history check on them. And then, like I mentioned, get them reconnected to the benefits again. Then the referral is made, coordinated entry. Our outreach team in Minneapolis, along with Radius and the partners that we work with, can do that coordinated entry on site also, so we can get them, if we feel like this is a good candidate for our voucher, and we gather all the information offhand and we believe it's a good candidate for it, we can actually start the process on that spot, get the ORI signed, get them connected to the coordinated entry system. And then from there, like I mentioned, if they do not qualify for the voucher, then we'll get them into shelter for the night while we try to work on the back end with them and see if there's anything we can do, if we can talk to the judge, if we can talk to their probation officer, if there's any letters of support that we can do. And that's where I work with HRA, Metro HRA, on trying to gather all that information on what they require and what we can gather for them. We work as a partnership from, as soon as I get an initial contact, or one of my HAT members gets an initial contact to the end. So we're constantly sharing information, gathering information that they need. And we'll be that right for them a lot of times, just to try to get them housed. We go and pick them up, take them to appointments that they need, bring them to HRA, bring them wherever they need to go. We just want to speed up the process and be there, assist in any way that we can. And just a little stats for you from 2019 to 2022, we've housed 424 people, and that's that's women, parents and children. So we've issued 233 vouchers, but out of those vouchers, 424 people have been housed. Any questions on that, I guess? Yeah, go ahead. Councilmember.
Sergeant Rodriguez, thank you very much for this. I have a kind of, one of those things that keeps me awake at night is homeless children and what they're experiencing. A number of years ago, when I was working at Assumption Catholic Church here in downtown St. Paul, I happened to be walking behind a young dad and his little girl who appeared to be about 3 or 4 years old. And I overheard a conversation between them, and she was telling her dad how much she liked the place that they slept at the night before and could they stay there again that night. And I remember the impact it had on me, just hearing that conversation. During the first year of COVID, driving on Mounds Boulevard past Metro State University one morning, I was at a stoplight, and in the encampment just west of Metro State, I noticed what appeared to be a young mom reaching into a playpen to pick up an infant. I'm wondering, do we have a guesstimate as to how many homeless children there are here in our region and what the age range is? I'm a former elementary teacher, and I keep thinking of, you know, if you asked a homeless child to draw a house, if they'd even know what a house is. Or that there's any data, can you share that with us?
Thank you, Councilmember. I don't have exact data on children. However, it's very low. We don't encounter many children out there with families. What we have seen a rise in is more of the youth, so teenagers becoming homeless. So and I think that started during COVID also. So that's been on the rise. As far as children, and even when we do encounter children, families out in the street, we get them into shelter immediately. We can get them, and I believe Hennepin County has like No Family Will Be Out in the Street program where they'll get them into shelter immediately if it's a family.
Go ahead.
If I could just broad community conversation about climate change, and the issue of homelessness came up. And an administrator from one of the school districts in that region described how the number of homeless students, and he didn't specify grades or ages, but the number of homeless students between last year and this year has doubled in their school district. So I think it's something that we need to be concerned about long-term. You know, A, they're homeless, but B, what are they being exposed to in addition to the homelessness?
Yeah, so thank you, Councilmember. Like I mentioned, we don't encounter it much on the trains or transit system. So it might be in other parts of the state, but as far as the transit system, it's been more of the teenage age. But if we do, our officers are really good at pointing that out, and they will call one of us immediately, and we'll try to get them connected to services immediately. We have youth shelters as well in Minneapolis where we get them connected to services right away. So yeah, that hasn't been, or it hasn't been a big issue because we haven't been seeing it much on the train, but yeah, we address it immediately when we do see that.
Thank you. Chair Zelli, Councilmember Vento, I think one of the discrepancies is there's different definitions of homelessness depending on I see that you probably know this from working in the schools. So schools are able to define, like our definition doesn't include doubled up, for example, so sleeping on somebody's couch, whereas the school definition of homelessness does. And so a lot of what we're talking about when we're looking at the HAT partnership is that very visible, like kind of stereotypical homelessness that you think about as somebody really fending for themselves on the streets. And I kind of define it in my own mind as that is the homelessness that the system is basically leaving behind right now, because there are better options for families where it's pretty appalling to see kids out on the street. And so we've kind of figured out it's not a perfect solution to have kids just going to shelter, right? That's not ideal either. That's certainly not a permanent solution. But in terms of seeing that visible homelessness on the street, that might be, why you're hearing something different from Sergeant Rodriguez than what you're hearing from the schools.
If I could just clarify, so Margaret, you work under the HUD definition of homeless youth as opposed to the Federal Department of Education. Okay, got it. familiar with those definitions.
We had another question, council member?
Go ahead, Mel.
Thank you for this, and I know we're going to get more information, but I'm curious. Hennepin County used to do Homeless Connect at the convention center, and I know my husband and I volunteered for that for several years. And they brought all the service providers together, and people were invited to come in, and they would pair us individually with a person experiencing homelessness or a family or whatever. But there were volunteers from virtually every support that needed to be tapped into, so people could get an ID card if they needed one. They could find their social security number. They could apply for housing. If they needed glasses, they could. There were vision doctors there. There were dentists there that could do simple cleanings and so forth, and refer them to a future date if they needed deeper treatment. We would have lunch with them. It was just an incredible program, really. And I think a couple of the things that were on there that were especially good that happened during that time was there was someone there taking oral histories. And then there was also a professional photographer there. So when there were families there, or mothers with children or fathers with children who probably never had a professional photographer take their picture and give it to them on the spot. It was so respectful. But there were so many things, simple legal things could be resolved on the spot. I'm sure you're familiar with all of this. So I guess what I'm wondering is, it was disappointing that it stopped, and I'm wondering if there is ever conversation that it might start up again, or again, bringing all those services together to deal with in one place. And one of the things we heard over and over was, we take a bus and we have to go to St. Paul, and then we have to get on the bus and we have to be on Nicollet and 26, and then, and it can take days to do the things that need to be done. So anyway, can you comment on that?
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember. So I know exactly what event you're talking about, because I actually volunteered for that event several years ago. I think it was in like 2012. And they don't provide that anymore. However, Higher Ground, also known as Dorothy Day here in St. Paul, provides services like that. So they have an actual calendar that goes out weekly of the services. They're kind of drop-in hours where homeless individuals can go in and do any medical exams. They can get, like I mentioned, their IDs. Any services that event would provide, they can provide them at Dorothy Day or Higher Ground. And a lot of them are familiar with it. And they'll have specific events too, like you mentioned, like the portrait thing. They'll have, I think recently they sent out like a drawing event to like show your talent and stuff like that. So they do put on specific events for them. And a lot of the homeless in St. Paul is very familiar with it's called the Opportunity Center. It's right across Higher Ground. And that's where they receive their breakfast, their lunch and dinners every day. So there's something similar to that already, but I can look into that event too. I mean, I totally forgot about it until you mentioned it, but it was a good event.
Quick follow-up, maybe. And maybe they're doing this, are they, any of this volunteer driven, or is this all staff driven that's going on at Higher Ground every day? Again, bringing people in, because it's such an education for many people in the community to get a much deeper understanding of the need and how they can participate. Sometimes it's overwhelming. What can I do as a person? Well, you can do a lot, starting with respect. And so and maybe that's on me that I wasn't familiar that was already going on, and I need to look into that. But I hope that there is a volunteer element in there for individuals.
Councilmember, I don't know of any volunteer opportunities right now. They're all staff. They're all paid staff that work there and do all these services. Some of our outreach, for instance, Radius Health goes out there and they do some services there as well. But I'm not sure of any volunteer opportunities.
Thank you.
Should we continue with our presentation?
Keep going.
I'm going to pass the mic to Ryan. All right, Mr. Chair, council members, I'm going to give you just a little bit more background and then really spend some time on a narrative. I'm your frontline staff working on this program and just want to share with you how folks navigate this process with us. The story that Councilmember Vento shared very well could have been the client I'd like to tell you about today, a young person with a young child who was helped by our homeless action team very early on in the process. But just for a little bit more grounding, I want to separate the mainstream voucher program associated with the work of the HAT team from our emergency housing voucher program. Persons experiencing homeless in the metro area may receive one of these two vouchers. Both programs are designed to assist people experiencing homelessness but have different admission criteria. The mainstream voucher has historically been associated with our homeless action team. Admission to the mainstream program requires applicants be somewhere between the ages of 18 and 61, so non-elderly, and have at least one adult in the household with a documented disability. We also must look back at criminal records for the last 3 years to review any violent or criminal drug charges on the record. The Metro Transit Homeless Action Team, as Sergeant Rodriguez has alluded to, is really an excellent partner in helping us review these backgrounds and determine appropriate eligibility for the mainstream voucher program, and really help some of our applicants that might have otherwise been denied admission clear up backgrounds and be eligible, to participate in the program. Margaret also let you know that these vouchers are not sunsetting. We have 253 in active use, some that are still continuing to be filled. If the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team might determine that an applicant has a criminal background that won't work for the mainstream voucher program, or they don't fit into the age or disability requirements, as the emergency housing voucher program has no disability requirement for eligibility, they may refer folks that they're meeting on the train differently. Any person experiencing homelessness who's 18 or older is eligible for an emergency housing voucher. They do not need that disability verification, and they benefit from certain flexibilities allowed when vouchers were issued by HUD on criminal background admission criteria. Emergency housing voucher participants also benefit from a year of case management. That was a mandate of the emergency housing voucher program for at least the first year of their time in housing. Since the emergency housing voucher program began in 2021, we've really seen the benefit of that case management for participants navigating the process into housing, and even more so maintaining stably housed after move-in. So we've started to really implement that case management requirement with our mainstream voucher program. And we utilize the contracts that Sergeant Rodriguez has talked about with our service providers throughout the metro area to serve those clients. Just the process of getting folks through the referral is really significant, but the process of finding housing is even more significant of a challenge. Did I hit the wrong one? I'm sorry.
That's okay, everything's fixable.
All right, so once participants are connected to a community case manager, determined eligible, and issued either an emergency housing voucher or a mainstream voucher, staff from Metro HRA will begin assisting the client and their case manager with intensive, personalized housing search. This is really a unique and specialized service that Metro HRA provides and is critical to the success of our clients and our programming. Many regular housing choice voucher holders begin their housing search process with some level of barrier, making it difficult to secure housing, even if it's just that they have low income. Our emergency voucher holders and mainstream voucher holders are likely to come to us with multiple compounding barriers, making their housing search even more difficult. I'd like to demonstrate how the housing search process works with a high barrier family by telling you a little bit about one of the first clients that was connected to Metro HRA through the Homeless Action Team. I'll use James as a pseudonym, was contacted by one of our Metro Transit officers, Metro Transit Homeless Action Team officers, on the Green Line overnight in December of 2018. James was riding the train through the night as his primary means of shelter. He had just turned 24 and had aged out of youth services, and really saw the train as a safer alternative to going to an adult shelter.
James spoke with one of our HAT officers on the train that night and was connected to me the following day. I met with James at the Central Library and we completed this giant voucher application packet, and I answered some of James's questions that he felt were really important and explained some of the more difficult, harder to understand concepts of participating with this giant federal voucher program. We navigated ways that James could verify his and his daughter's social security number and identity when they no longer had physical copies of their social security cards. We helped James connect with a mental health professional that could not only complete his paperwork for admission to the program, but could provide him with ongoing mental health services. James and I discussed his previous housing history. And learning that James had never had an apartment or been on a lease, we planned for how we would address this on rental applications and how he would discuss this with a property manager. For young people in James's situation, the line goes, no rental history is better than bad rental history. We reviewed James's criminal background and strategized ways to explain a lengthy history of loitering, petty theft, and disorderly conduct, and learned how to frame this as crimes of homelessness that could be solved by securing safe and stable housing. We worked with the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team to close multiple open charges for riding transit without paying a fare and provided James with a Transit Assistance Program, or TAP card, to assure no new charges would be added to his record during the housing search process. All of this and more went into meeting James where he was at before we could ever begin actually searching for housing. After successfully navigating the voucher admission process, getting connected to community resources, and building James's confidence and skills, we started contacting potential property managers. Staff from Metro HRA consistently engage property managers and owners to build a pool of properties willing to rent to voucher holders interested in voucher holders and with folks who are interested in working with this specialized population. James and I discussed that due to his criminal record and lack of rental history, there would be some housing options that were just unattainable. We still focused on finding a location that felt safe for James, provided access to transit, and had high-quality schools for him and his daughter. We began to contact owners in that desired neighborhood and really started with small private property owners that would be willing to meet with James, hear his story, and consider his applications despite the barriers that we shared up front. All of the work we had done up to this point allowed us to apply to one property and be approved for that property quite quickly. Thanks to funding available for our special voucher populations, Metro HRA was able to assist James with his application fee. These are usually like $30 or $50, but that can be really insurmountable, especially if you have to apply multiple places. So we're able to help with application fees, and we're able to meet this property manager's request to pay a double deposit based on James' criminal record and lack of rental history, while still providing him with access to beds, linens, plates, and other basic necessities you need to make a house feel like a home. James really has made this first apartment a safe and stable home for himself and his daughter for the last 3 years. Actually, just today, he moved into a bigger and better apartment. His daughter has her own bathroom now. It's been a really great trajectory. Metro HRA staff has engaged in this process hundreds of times, in some cases of greater or lesser complexity, for each client referred to our program with demonstrable success. Despite numerous complex barriers, the success rate of voucher placement for emergency housing vouchers and mainstream vouchers is higher than our general housing voucher population. Oh, that one, right one, all right. So now that we've helped our specialized voucher population secure housing, we still face this challenge of maintaining housing and high utilization of our programs. We've seen great success with the emergency housing voucher program's mandate that clients have at least that year of case management service once housed, and are implementing this practice into our mainstream voucher program. Our referral partners and the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team are connecting clients with culturally appropriate providers who operate independently from the work of Metro HRA and the HAT team. These case managers are able to address the holistic needs of clients and work with Metro HRA staff to manage housing barriers, assist with housing search, and meet the needs of our clients after moving into housing. Our community partners have reported their work with clients is best when they're connected at the beginning of the voucher application process allowing them to build trust with their client even before the voucher is issued. Clients can choose to opt out of these services or find their own case management, and it won't have an impact on their housing. Still, with all of the housing search assistance and support from community partners, housing options are limited for voucher holders. Like in James's case, not all owners and managers will work with high barrier clients, and still many clients have even higher barriers than James. We find that certain neighborhoods can be unaffordable for clients with extremely low income, and especially so for those with zero income. A low supply of deeply affordable housing can cause clients with the lowest income and highest barriers to be concentrated into one area or with a handful of affordable housing providers. High turnover of property management makes it difficult for our staff here to maintain good working relationships with those managers. And one of the most successful tools we have to help our clients be competitive in this market is the special funding available for specialized voucher populations. So here you'll see some of the approved funding categories that we have for the mainstream and emergency housing voucher program, as well as that temporary CARES Act funding Margaret mentioned earlier, broken down into each individual category. CARES Act funding was again only available during a short amount of time from 2020 to 2021 on an emergency basis. Funding for emergency housing vouchers was explicitly defined by HUD when those vouchers were awarded in 2021, and funding for the mainstream voucher program associated with the work of the Transit Action Team has been available since that program began in 2018. I'll continue to use James as an example. James used some funding from our mainstream voucher program to assist with this housing search. As mentioned previously, we were able to assist with the payment of a double deposit to secure his first apartment. Metro HRA staff worked with his county case manager and the emergency assistance process to kind of split that payment, which allowed us to maintain some funds for James to pay for things like that TAP card. And to help him get furniture from one of our community partners, Bridging, which provides donated furniture and household goods to families and individuals transitioning out of homelessness. If you're unfamiliar with their services, I'd really encourage you to check them out. They're very important to the work that we do and really make these apartments that would otherwise be empty feel like home, feel like a place that you want to live and be. James also received help with his first month's rent and a utility payment to allow him time to save money and prepare to take on these expenses his second month in housing. This funding truly makes a difference for our clients. James's example really highlighted the main sources of funding: our specialized voucher programs, access, deposits, rent assistance maybe for that first month so you can get back on your feet, application fees, and moving expenses. Here you'll see the average cost per client or family broken down into those most frequently used categories, followed up by the number of clients over the lifetime of our program that have accessed those funds. One very important funding category we didn't discuss in James's case was that of debts owed. This funding category generally applies to past due utility bills that would prevent service from being established at a new apartment or to money owed to a previous property manager. When owners and managers screen for rental and credit history, there are rarely exceptions made on approving applications when the client owes money to a utility provider or specifically to a previous property. It can be little more than $100 in past due rent, but money owed to that previous property is almost always an automatic denial. To correct this, we can pay off those debts and provide new potential property managers with verification the debt has been paid, which allows a client who may have never been able to access housing move forward. I'll turn it back over to Margaret and we'll wrap up this portion of the conversation.
So I'm just bringing it home. As you can tell, again, these two they're the folks that they work with are really doing the important work in the community, and I kind of want to just take a step back and summarize some of our key takeaways around what's working and where we see some gaps in the work that we're doing. So as you saw in the previous two slides, funding, not necessarily even for our staff time, although, we appreciate paychecks, but specifically funding that is flexible and that we can use to address households' varied and complex rental and personal histories, and really just get them on the right track, clean reset to be able to be successful in their housing is really indispensable. The ability to approach a landlord and not only say, I have this tenant that I'm working with and they're attached to case management and I can vouch for them and I can bring in, Officer Rodriguez and have her vouch for them too, but I can also pay a security deposit, really is the difference between a yes and a no. And that when we have people going through like emergency assistance, and so you've got somebody who's got a bad rental history and then they're saying, well, I could probably get the deposit covered, but I just got to go to emergency assistance office quick, apply for that, wait 30 days, maybe get denied, that unit's gone in this market. And so being able to pay that really helps our participants be competitive. And then we mentioned, with the emergency housing voucher program, we saw with the flexibilities that program created around program screening criteria, we were able to work with a lot more families. Now, that has created a lot more headache on behalf of, Tasha and the folks that she works with, because we are having people come in that have, recent criminal history on their record, which we can issue them a voucher, but they still need to find housing. But at least in terms of giving people a fair shot, there's nothing worse than needing to deny somebody for housing for a low-level drug offense. And that happens quite a bit with our mainstream program. If you look at folks that are in encampments that have no other options and therefore they're sleeping, in an encampment, chances are criminal history is what's preventing them from housing in the first place. And so we become an additional barrier. We're following federal guidelines. We don't really have much to say about that in the case of the mainstream program, but having those flexible program screening criteria in EHV has meant that we're able to help a whole lot more people. And then providing flexibilities and support once they're admitted. We do that because we've got dedicated staff on the HRA side, like Ryan and Tasha, that are working. We're actually developing kind of an interventions program. So when people fall into crisis, once they've secured housing, how do we work with them to keep them stably housed? And maybe that means being more flexible and allowing appeals and allowing continued understanding and education to keep people on our program. But that also means making sure that they're connected to a case manager or some sort of third-party provider that can really follow with them much closer than we as a housing staff or our officers who are already very overburdened in the field could ever possibly do. And so just to wrap up what's working, I think we really discovered with the emergency housing voucher program that requiring case management for at least 1 year as a condition of getting a voucher, and this is more on the service provider side. Service providers are willing to work with us, knowing that there's a client with a voucher attached to them. Vouchers are very hard to get, and so if they know that they've got a client with a voucher coming in the door, they're willing to commit to that case management for a year, because that's already figuring out a very large piece of the puzzle of that client's care management. And so we're currently working on how we can really institutionalize that requirement and then support those service providers so that they can be successful working with the housing authority as well. What's needed, we know that funding works, and I think that there's always just nervousness around either not having enough funding or we could serve every single one of our voucher participants could use funding for move-in and housing stability, frankly, and being able to provide flexible funding for housing interventions. Lost keys, to get a new set of keys made is a couple $100. Any small expense once people are in housing can be the difference between being able to make rent and not, and it can set off this pattern of then defaulting on payments and then being back out on the streets. In that same tune, ongoing case management. We could probably double the HAT officer staff with social workers and street outreach workers and just extra bodies helping to do all of the things that our officers are doing, and then being able to provide that really essential follow-up and support for people once they're in housing. We need landlords to accept vouchers, and that's across the programs, but man, the pool gets even smaller when you're looking at anybody with any sort of blips on their record. And so we need more landlords to accept vouchers, and we can educate and incentivize, which we absolutely do. We try to kind of sweeten the deal with being able to pay security deposits, but we also just need more folks to step up to the plate. And then in that same vein, housing affordable to people at very low incomes. There's just, I know that you're aware that we're missing a very large piece of the housing puzzle with housing at or under 30% AMI. And I'm certainly not an expert, I'm not a housing planner, but I know that is a big need. And certainly when it comes to housing that are a lot of the affordable units that are out there, they got the brand new signs that say, affordable housing, new units opening up. Our tenants go to apply there. Do you accept vouchers? Yes, we accept vouchers. Oh, great. And then we look at how much they're charging for rent, and it is set at 60% AMI. Our voucher affordability is based on 50% AMI. And so they say that they're affordable, and that's no fault of their own. They are following the rules, not to call them out. But our payment standards are based on 50% AMI, which is a mismatch with the market. And so that's just a huge missing piece of the pie. And then I've already kind of talked about this with ongoing case management, but there's some folks that might not be ready for kind of conventional private market housing. Maybe the voucher they're not going to be successful on that program because there is still active substance abuse happening. There is some untreated serious persistent mental illness. So what are those other housing options that isn't just throwing people back out on the streets? And that, again, is not really my area of expertise, but it's certainly something that we know is needed, because we know that we're not admitting even like a medium amount of the fraction of the folks that Sergeant Rodriguez and her team are experiencing on the streets, and so encountering on the streets. And so we know that there's a huge need for that supportive housing where people can get sober, get their feet underneath them, and then be able to kind of move up into more permanent long-term housing. So on the horizon, what we're working on is just trying to institutionalize and build in that service provider component. We've renewed our contract recently with Radius, but we're also looking to kind of build out a more expansive RFP for the coming year to be able to have even more service provider involvement and more kind of formalized relationships. With that service provider contract, that hookup is usually happening when the voucher is initiated. And sometimes, people are doing good in housing, they disconnect with their service provider, or, high turnover with service providers, they go away, their staff turnover, whatever, people get disconnected from their service provider. Well, then 6 months, a year, 18 months down the line, somebody's having a crisis, we need to be able to have partnerships for somebody to get reconnected to services. And so looking at those interventions for long-term housing stability and being able to intervene early and catch people before they're getting evicted from their unit, we're trying to kind of catch them before that crisis happens. When somebody calls us and they said, I've got an eviction notice, there's really very little we can do, and that also means they get termed from our voucher program, which is just, again, a lot of work down the drain. It takes so much work to get people in the door and into housing. Let's keep them housed if we can. And then lastly, I'm going to pass the mic to something that I haven't been involved with, but we thought you'd be interested in knowing a little bit more that's on the horizon, and that is as we kind of mature in our understanding of encampments and doing that street outreach, we've been working on a process for encampments, and that's something that Sergeant Rodriguez and her team has been involved with, as well as Terry Smith and others. So I will let Sergeant Rodriguez speak to that a little bit, and then we will open up for discussion.
And just to piggyback a little bit on what Margaret was talking about with expanding service, MTPD is also looking on bringing on an embedded social worker, which would be out in the field with our head officers to handle the chemical dependency issues and the mental health issues that we're experiencing on the light rail and transit centers. That's something that's been in discussion. We've had meetings on, and hopefully we can bring it on by 2024. We have the Radius Health contract, which handles the Ramsey County side, so we're looking to bring on someone for the Hennepin County side to work specifically with our officers and do outreach and kind of follow up with those existing clients as well. And then going on to the procedure of encampments. Before we do any, I'm going to kind of cover the encampment cleanup. As you know, the encampments have grown since COVID. And before we do any encampment cleanups, we actually do a lot of outreach in the encampments. We go out and we talk to these individuals. We provide services. We make that initial contact and see what their needs are. A lot of them refuse our services. And so that's where we go into the encampment cleanup, but we do offer services, shelter. If some qualify for the voucher, then we'll get them into that program. So we make many encounters with them and try to get them into services, try to provide outside services to them as well. So we'll bring on Hennepin County Streets to, they're called Streets to Housing programs. So they'll come in with us as well, and they'll provide Hennepin County benefits and stuff to them. So we're not just going into the encampments and clearing them out and kicking them out. So we make several intents to try to get them into some type of program or services. At the end, they refuse not, to come on board with any services that we provide. They continue to stay there. That's when we determine if it's Met Council property, if it's city property, or if it's MnDOT property. If it's Met Council property, obviously it falls back onto us. What are we going to do about it before it continues to grow? So that's where we will post signage. We notify them that they have, a week to vacate. And we continue offering those services while we're going back every day. And informing them that we will be cleaning up the site at some point. We offer shelter, clothing, food, storage. Like I mentioned, the storage bins that DID offers. We provide storage for their equipment because a lot of them say, well, I have all this stuff. I don't know where to put it. Well, we have storage for you. We'll even transport it for you if you'd like. So we provide many services. Some of you may know we have a MAV. It's called a Mobile Assessment Vehicle. It's a huge bus. We actually have 2 of them now. So that's what we go out in when we go out to these encampments. And we have it filled with all these clothing, foods. The storage bins are also in there, so we can bring them out to the site to them. We'll also try to make that contact, or we'll try to see if they qualify for the voucher as well. So we'll bring up the voucher program again, because sometimes people that were there when we initially started going, people that are there at the last time that we go weren't there initially, so we'll keep bringing up the voucher program and see if they qualify. And like I mentioned, the Streets to Housing will also go out with us. So several notifications are made before the closure is made. And then eventually the closure is made, we bring in, all the resources. We get the trucks that need to remove all the equipment, and again, we'll store their belongings if that needs to be done. A lot of them will just take their belongings with them and then relocate somewhere else. And then at the end, we do an after-action report where how many individuals did we connect with, how many individuals actually qualified for services, how many were we able to house, what partners were out there with us. So we have a detailed after-action report at the end as well. Yeah, I think it's a lot of work that goes into encampment cleanups. But yeah, I don't have anything else to
That's a lot. Thank you so much. Wow, I know we have a lot of interest and probably a lot of questions and comments. But Councilor Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, with the emergency housing vouchers being sunsetted this year, how does that work? You've got a voucher, you're in a place, and now the time starts ticking.
Yeah.
And how do we transition them so that they don't once again just go through the system back to zero and be homeless again?
Chair Zelli, Councilmember Johnson. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. The voucher isn't taken away in September. It's just that if they end up making enough income where they would fall off assistance, or if they get terminated from the program for some other reason, we just wouldn't reissue the voucher.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they're not losing their housing.
Okay, good, thank you.
No new vouchers.
No new vouchers, correct. Yeah,
Thank
that would
you.
be a better way to put it.
Any other, Peter?
Great presentation, all three of you. I'm wondering if for either one of you, if you were sitting on this side of the table, what resources could we provide to you to make your jobs more effective, efficient? I like the example of the flexible funding and how you can use that for whatever is needed at that particular moment.
Can you double our staff?
Really double it? Yeah. I mean,
Well, yeah.
if you could snap your fingers and be like, dang, I wish we just had 3 more people, 10 more people, or I wish that flexible fund went from this dollar amount to this dollar amount, that would make a huge impact.
I'm gonna let you go first. Yeah. Do you feel comfortable going first?
Well, actually, thank you, Councilmember. Actually, I wanted to cover a little bit on that, staffing is a big issue, as Margaret mentioned. Our homeless action team has downsized since it's been created. Initially, we started with 8 officers, a lieutenant, a sergeant. It's down to 3 officers and myself. So a lot of our calls are homeless calls, and it's hard for us to get to all. And on top of that, take patrol calls. So not only do we take all our homeless calls, but we're also out in the street taking regular calls. As you see, many of our officers have left the field, and so staffing is very low right now. So the HAT unit has not restaffed those officers that have.
We have authorized positions, but just not filled.
What's that?
We have authorized positions,
yes,
not filled.
Exactly. Yes. So back to that. I mean, it is staffing, it is funding as well. And so with the embedded social worker that we're trying to bring on, obviously there's funding that comes along with that. I would love to have 2 embedded social workers if we had the funding for that. So we have to be very cautious with the funding, and then obviously I'm trying to add another person to our unit, and I brought it up at our last command staff meeting, how they could really help out during the day and make those contacts with the resources we have and try to get them connected to services, because during the day is when the office hours are open, so we could try to get them connected, bring them out to places. And I only have 1 officer working during the day, but at night I have 2 officers. Well, I have 1, they're on rotating shifts, so 1 on each side, A and B side. But those are the officers that are making those referrals to Winter Safe Space, which is here in St. Paul. That's the shelter. So at the end of the line, where the line ends at the Union Depot, they get off there, and I have an officer waiting for them at night, and they make those referrals to Winter Safe Space to get them into shelter at night. Just for stats on that, in 2022, we provided 2,227 referrals to Winter Safe Space alone. So.
Would you like to? Oh, yeah. Do you want to go? Okay. Well, and so I think on the staffing side, I mean, it's not just like we want more bodies, but I think just something that illuminates this on our side is, our regular coordinators have a caseload of 400, 450, and probably a healthy caseload for somebody like Ryan or Tasha would be around 25 to 30 people, and so it's just really time-intensive work. And so we're constrained in how much we can help people based on, how much staff we have to go around. So certainly more bodies would help, but we don't necessarily even need more permanent staff. I think that's our thought behind building out the service provider contracts and having embedded social workers and trying to think really creatively about how we can be building up the capacity of the local community. Terry Smith, Director Smith, and I are serving on the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness, and and Sarah Berkey was here. Hi, yeah. We're all serving on and Sergeant Rodriguez. Look, we're all here. We're all serving on Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness, and we've been assigned 2 consultants. They're people with lived experience, and one of the things of homelessness, and one of the things that they've really been harping us on is that you need people with lived experience on these embedded teams that are really that front line, whether it's people with active, substance use disorders or that are in recovery, that are helping, really approach people where they're at in their substance use, and then people with lived experience of being homeless. And that's not necessarily somebody who needs to be an employee, a badged employee of the Metropolitan Council, but there's organizations out there that are kind of building up that capacity and already have those relationships. So how can we be connecting there, and what is like a meaningful role for them, and what is like all those questions? I don't know if we've 100% figured that out, but I think it takes money in that respect. And then I would just say public policy more broadly around, I don't know what the solutions are, but generating more deeply affordable housing and figuring out ways that we can get more landlords to accept and work with our voucher program. And again, there's only so much educating that we can do. We sometimes need people to feel like that they need to do those things in other ways. So I will put that in the role of you policymakers and not have an opinion about exactly how to do that.
Councilmember Vinta.
I think Councilmember Wolf had her hand up before me, so.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So once you get somebody into either a mainstream or emergency housing voucher, how many of them are still stable and there like a year later?
Chair Zelli, Councilmember Wolf, I don't have the stats on the emergency housing voucher program. Well, we might have something, but it wouldn't be an accurate estimate because it's really only been active for about a year. I think Ryan might have. No, you don't have it. No. Do you have like a ballpark? Do you have like a gut feeling? I can get you the number. Yes. We've got it. Yeah, we've got it. I just don't have it. Do you have any sense?
That it is surprisingly higher than we would expect with a population that comes with so many barriers. I think our success is greater than I have seen working in other similar programs serving those experiencing homelessness. So I think it'll be a good number.
I was gonna say some sort of guesstimate of that would be, I'm trying to find my piece of paper, where 424 people housed, 233 with 233 vouchers is a stat that Sergeant Rodriguez threw out. That's specific to the mainstream program. So if 233 vouchers were located housing, we have our current, we're at 200, like maybe 6 or something vouchers right now. So that means that we've got 206 out of 233 that are still in housing. So that's a really high number. And some of those people that aren't in housing, it might be that it's not just, negative reasons why they may no longer have the voucher, but it could be.
Councilmember Vinta.
This isn't a question, Mr. Chair, it's just an observation. I can't speak for Minneapolis, and I don't live in St. Paul, but I spend a fair amount of time downtown St. Paul, and I have to just note that I think that our 2 core cities are bearing a lot as it relates to homelessness and encampments. I know that encampments are occurring elsewhere in the region, but I think all of our communities need to step up to this issue and not leave it to Minneapolis and St. Paul to try and figure out. Higher ground here in St. Paul has been a blessing, but they only have so much space. And putting more and more people and more programs for the homeless in downtown St. Paul or in downtown Minneapolis is only going to further weigh on our transit system. So it is crucial that all communities participate in this and do what they can. And as an example, I've done a shout out here for Hugo before, but Hugo, a relatively small community that's growing, their local Catholic church, along with a Lutheran church, created a homeless shelter at the Catholic Church Rectory. And in addition to that, they had a local business that donated a significant amount of property that Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity used to build a number of homes. So if we could have that happening throughout the region on a really regular basis, it would be great. So I needed to preach. Thanks for listening. Amen.
Thank you. All right, on this side, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to start by thanking you all for the work that you're doing, and if you can pass those things on to your other team members. It's just amazing. And if you think, we saw the timeline of 5 years, right, 2018 since the HAT team was created, and just look at the progress that has been made, what we know now that we didn't know 5 years ago, how we can respond as a unit of government to serve the people within the region. So hats off to all of you, congratulations.
Pun intended.
What's that?
Pun intended.
Oh, right,
Hats
pun
off.
intended, yeah, it
Yes.
wasn't even, but no, yeah, I'll
Sorry.
take credit for it. But, and I talked a lot about this before, and I don't work in homeless services or social services at all, but I spend an amazing amount of time in conversations around unsheltered homelessness. I serve on Heading Home Hennepin's executive committee to help do some, to be a partner in some of what's going on here. I am in community level meetings around issues of unsheltered homelessness, substance use, every week. And I want folks here to know how often, I bet it's at least twice a month, someone at a community level meeting will say, we need more things like the HAT team. They're very aware of your work because you're very present, right, in the community. I mean, I see it in the community, and so I think that's a testament to this good work. And there's a ton of things I want to say, but in light of the hour, I just want to say a few things. One is we see now how resource intensive it is to address issues of homelessness. And now as we talk more about prevention going forward, it's the same. It's not just giving someone a rent check, right? It's the same kinds of wraparound support services that get people from homelessness into housing, that keep people in housing. And there isn't a part of our government that really does that, right? So we've been innovating in the last 5 years, and our innovation is the Homeless Action Team. And I have to say that I started sort of being involved with issues around unsheltered homelessness, especially during the Wall of Forgotten Natives. I wasn't even a Met Council member then, and then I became a Met Council member. And as there's been frustration expressed in the communities and within units, jurisdictions of government about who does what and who doesn't do what, which is probably what you hear more often, I've been really proud of the work that Met Council has done. We have taken resources that we already have and figured out how to leverage them in a more effective way to serve really difficult to serve populations, and hats off. And so I'm glad whoever asked the question about what resources you need, I'm glad you asked that. I think we should take some of that to heart. This takes a lot of resources in one piece, and Councilmember Lindstrom kind of started to hit on this, if you were on this side of the table. But one thing, and I wouldn't expect you to address it, but it's the governance piece, right? And so we're a regional government, and so the title of this presentation was a regional approach. And I feel like we should take that to heart, right? There's things that we have, both the formal and informal authority to step in to help coordinate region-wide into an ecosystem where there isn't a ton of willingness to step in, because generally stepping in means additional costs, right? And we've been willing to step in. And so there's a leadership piece here, a governance piece that I feel like is something that this side of the table, for those of it, if we serve another term or survive into another term, can really take to heart and figure out how to express this. Because there is a regional reluctance, and Sergeant Rodriguez talked about what's going on in Hennepin and Ramsey counties, and Councilmember Bento pointed out that the core cities bear a burden, and I agree, but homelessness exists in every county in the metro. And so how do we exercise that leadership in an ecosystem where there may be jurisdictional reluctance to step in? And I think that's something that's worth exploring on this side of the table as we go forward. There is a governance piece here. We didn't touch on it. I wouldn't expect you to touch on it. That's our job. And so just to kind of put that out there, I'm looking forward to another term and an ability to kind of expand on this incredibly great work. And I guess I'll just drop one thing in as well, and we didn't really touch on this much either. You did talk about the community level partners that we have, either actual partners now or potential partners in the future, and that's really, I think, a stratum of partnership that we need to explore. It's not easy, you have these very community level, very grassroots organizations that have more access to the populations we're trying to serve. And so how do we get that granular in working with some of these maybe difficult, or not difficult, just partners that we don't normally have. It's usually sort of the bigger the organization, the easier they are to partner with, you know. Well, easy isn't gonna solve anything here. So in one sector of, I think, potential partners that goes under leverage is the faith community. And I think, you know, you go to your volunteer, you know, there's huge volunteer cores connected to a lot of churches and other faith establishments. I just feel like there's an area worth exploring future partnership and a strong willingness amongst faith organizations to dive into this. Probably more willingness than government, right? And so I would just like to put that out there. But again, the biggest message I have for you and for the people that you work with is thank you.
Wonderful words, thank you, Councilmember. Johnson, then Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, you know, we know that you've told your story. It's been in the news and it's a positive story, but you know, it's just one that a lot of people don't really know that we're doing this work, and by we, I mean you, right? We're all on the same team, but you know, it's so important, the work that you're doing. If you weren't doing it, then what, right? I mean, then what? It would be, that would be news, you know, for the crisis that would be continuing to, I think, roll forward and you know, going in a really bad direction. So I just want to commend you for the excellent work that you're doing, tireless work that you're doing. It's work of heroes, because I'm sure it's exhausting. And I am really thrilled to hear you be so pleased about the successes that you're having, because they're real people, real families, and I just want to say how much I appreciate that. Just briefly, to your point about the faith community, I mean, I'm very lucky out in the western suburbs that we've got Beacon Interfaith that's kind of everywhere, but they've shown up a lot. We've got the Isaiah chapters that are everywhere that are trying to do a lot of public policy work. And then we've got Interfaith Outreach and Community Partners that was started, I guess, maybe 30 or 40 years ago to address homelessness in the suburbs, because people didn't think there were homeless people, but they were in the schools. And then I would make the bridge in my remarks to the private sector. They need to be partners in this, because there are homeless people showing up at work every day, and they're trying to get ready for work in their car, if they're lucky enough to have one, or trying to get their children to places. And we know this is also happening throughout the region, but it's happening in the suburbs. And some of the groups that have really blossomed over the last few decades are trying to, you know, rectify that too. And a lot of the work that you're talking about is being done in microcosms everywhere, but it's not woven together into a system where we can learn from each other. Maybe you do at your professional conferences, certainly, and there are, you know, I know organizations that are working on that, but there are holes in the system, I guess is all I want to say. But certainly, I've been saying this since I first started on the council, because in my role at Prosperity's Front Door before this, that whole effort was to really get the business community to understand how important stable and secure housing is, not only for the workers, their families, but it really is an underpinning of a good economy. And I've said this before here too, we need an economy that works for everybody. So while we're trying to solve it over here on the government side, yes, the private sector side over here needs to be working at it too. And that's why it's important when the Itasca Project, you know, has just released some of their work that they're doing in major organizations like Wells Fargo, and I think it was it not Blue Cross, United Health, I think, yep, because Charlie and I were there, and George was there that day, and Sam O'Connell at a recent presentation. So I wish we could all be in the same room together at the same time. I don't know if the people at Itasca know what's going on here, although I know, Charlie, you've been very engaged there. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. This too is the stuff that keeps me up at night. And you know, when budgets come forward, you know, it's always tough. I look at Mary, because she just does magic over the years with trying to keep us, you know, where we need to be on our budgets. But you know, just knowing what the need is important for all of us as policymakers, because it kind of comes bundled up and ready to go as it works its way through the system. But I think to still know what the unmet need is in our budgets is important. We can't solve all of it, perhaps, but to know what that unmet need is. So I thank you for your frankness today and for all the hard work you're doing.
Thank you. Sue.
I promise this will be my last one, Mr. Chair. I just want to.
Keeping count here.
Oh, good, yeah. Double digits. I want to piggyback on what Councilmember Lindgren said. I just need to make a historical point that it was a priest in downtown St. Paul who approached his city council member and his member of Congress in the 80s and said, we need help. And because of his going to those two individuals, I believe it was in 1987 that the first federal legislation was passed and signed. It was a bipartisan effort. I can only hope that that might happen again today if it was needed, or it is needed, but anyway, I just wanted to make the point that it started in St. Paul.
Good to know. Well, I will just finish, and I know we could all express our admiration, every one of us, in so many different ways, and the unmet need. I certainly have seen in housing, whether it's Itasca, nonprofit, Minneapolis, and the state, the interagency council, there isn't enough staff, enough people, enough resources. And that it's that 30%, you know, people talk about affordable housing, but very rarely is it the real need, and that's where it is. You're on the front line, so really respect what you're doing, and let's just consider this the start of a conversation. So we want to see you back and talk about what Councilmember Lindstrom implied, which is we have work to do, and we want to be your partners. Think about the governance and the resource allocation. It'll be something to consider going forward. We're just at time. I want to just acknowledge again, as I started this meeting, this was inspiring hearing this presentation. It was worth the delay to get it tonight. Thank you, Terry. You were very sweet sitting there, but you're right. And this is a collaboration where you think about Met Council as being all these different pillars that sometimes talk to each other a lot and collaborate, even within what we have, our resources, our housing, and our fleet. It's a transition because this is the end of our first term theory, this meeting. Next week, there'll be a swearing in of some reappointed, some new council members. So I just really quickly want to say what an honor it's been to serve in this first term. And really gratifying, because hearing your presentation kind of shows how much we've done, how much we're doing, but how much more work there is to be done. So those who have reapplied and are reappointed, God bless you. We've got a lot of work to do. We're going to be inspired to go forward. Those that are moving on, and there's a few who are not here, those who are moving on, moving forward, thank you for your service. This has been a great group. I'm looking at one person in particular, the vice chair, Molly. Molly, you have been the bedrock. And think about every one of these issues, whether it's transportation, housing, climate, right there. And to serve one of your last acts, but there is never a last act, because spoiler alert, you're going to continue to be involved in Met Council activities, so that's always going to be something important. But to be serving on the nominating committees, so assessing and considering the next council, which many of us will be here. Thank you for that. So Molly, and I say this only because before joining Met Council, I've always found people who said I either was on Met Council, I am on Met Council, or I'm planning to be on Met Council. So, you know, I think people who have served never quite leave. There's a continuing relationship, so we have some thoughts about keeping this connection. But I want to really thank everybody thinking about when we started, and I started a year in. I think I had about 6 weeks to hang a couple of pictures, and then we're all sent home. So, you know, but to go through the trauma of a pandemic, the mourning of George Floyd, the issues of social justice that are so important to us, how we brought equity forward, how we thought about these accomplishments, not just expanding transit, thinking about what we're doing with the climate tools. I'm sorry Peter's left. Think about some of the things we've accomplished, and I know George has a great PowerPoint, which some year we'll watch it, but I've looked at it vigorously, thinking about the challenges going forward. So we've done a lot. We have much to do, and of course we can't do it without an amazing staff. So, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody, for involved. This is a short goodbye because tomorrow morning we're back at it. But thank you all, and we look forward to continuing relationships. There are cookies. I just had a piece of one, but there's more cookies and cupcakes in the back. If you want to hang out, there's food. So, this meeting's adjourned.